All right, everyone. So for our asynchronous assignment, we're going to go over a student example. Hopefully you've already read it. The link is in the Dropbox in D2L. If you have not read the essay already, go back and do that before you watch the video because that will be very helpful. But we're going to go over a little bit about what they did well, what needs a little bit of work, and how they could have elevated it just a little bit to make this a good quality paper. Not that it's bad, it's a very good rough draft, but there are some little tweaks that they could do to really kind of make this a top quality paper. So first of all, just kind of taking a look at this particular essay. I didn't ask for any formatting, but I did require it for it to be double spaced, and it is double spaced. That is partially because if it's single spaced, then it wouldn't meet the minimum page limit requirement. So double spacing, so make sure you're doing that. I do like the fact that in this particular paper, they did use Times New Roman 12-point font. I would get into the habit of using that because when we kind of transition to MLA, that's what you're going to be using. So let's take a look at this. The title is AR for the Win. One thing I would do is center this. You can do that by highlighting it and kind of clicking on the center section in the toolbar. Titles are usually centered. This does require a title, and I don't want you to be titling it My Literacy Narrative. AR for the Win is actually a really nice, strong title that is a little bit elevated just from My Literacy Narrative. So very good on that. I do like how they start. This is a nice, strong first paragraph because it kind of sets the setting. And that's what you want to do with a narrative. You want to make sure that people know where this is taking place. And this is not taking place in Murfreesboro. This particular student spent their elementary years in Michigan. And they're very, very clear about that. Growing up in the west side of Flint, Michigan, my focus seemed to be a little bit of everywhere as a child. There's always something to try to get into, like City League sports, clubs at church, and even neighborhood parks. This is really good because he's trying to connect to the audience. Like, hey, you remember how busy your early childhood was? So I think that that's really, really important to help make that connection to the audience because that is something you want to do in a narrative. So there are a few little mistakes, of course, just some minor grammar, and just for time's sake, I'm just going to point out a few. We might actually take a look at this essay in class together, so maybe we can get into the nitty-gritty of it. But like right here where it says my second and third grade year, I would say even so, it wasn't until my second and third grade years did I gain an interest in reading. So down here, we get introduced to his teacher, my second grade teacher, Miss Young, who later became Mrs. McGuire. Right here, they use a semicolon that should be a comma. What we have here is in a positive phrase that kind of gives more information about Miss Young, and you would set that off with commas and not a semicolon comma thing. Was a taller brunette lady who smiled at anything that moved. Maybe a few more descriptions here would be good. I would say something like maybe a tall lady with brown hair, potentially, that smiled at anything that moved. Maybe give me a little bit more about what she looked like. Did she wear glasses? What color were her eyes, if you can remember it? Did she have a kind face? Just something, just to give me just a little bit more information about her. And right here, down here where it says, I became, With that being said, one can imagine how much more invested I became in reading when the school introduced AR reading to its students. First of all, whenever you have an abbreviation for anything, the very first thing you want to do is actually list it by name. So if I was giving some students some feedback, I would say, type out accelerated reading. I'm pretty sure that's the name of the program. So there, put accelerated reading, and then I would put AR in parentheses after that. And then from then on, you can refer to it as AR because you have to assume that your audience knows nothing about what you're talking about. And so I know what AR means because I taught. You know what AR means because some of you probably did it at school, but not every school did AR. And so this might be a little bit lost if you don't know what it is. And then if that's the case, I would delete the reading here. So he has a good description here that the books were labeled with an AR code, and each code had a different reading level, with the harder reading getting the greater rewards. So right here, it gets a little bit vague. Students had a quarterly goal in order to get full credit for the English class. So what were those goals? With a narrative, you want to be as specific as possible. You almost want to give too much detail. So give me some examples of what goals were. What goal did you have to do? How many points did you have to get in order to reach that goal? And how many books would you have had to read in order to reach that point? So I think that just adding a little bit more information here would just give the reader a better idea of what's going on in their, as far as this program goes. Being a top part of 3 scores in your grade, invited even better prizes into students' hands. Well, what were these prizes? Up here he mentions incentives. What were the incentives? Did you get ice cream at school? Did you get little toys? I can remember back, there was some sort of incentive where they got these little penguin keychains at my kids' school. And so they wanted to get, I forget if it was a fundraiser or something like that, where they had to sell so much and they got a cute little penguin keychain and they really wanted that. Give me some more details about what those prizes are. What did they look like? What made you want to get them? So a little bit more information in that paragraph is what's really going to elevate it into a really, really strong narrative. So that way the reader is really kind of immersed in that environment. So down here, they talk a little bit about the tests. The tests usually interrogated the readers about certain characters in the book and the actions they took throughout the plot. One of the things I would be curious about, again, start thinking about questions that the readers might be having. Was it a multiple choice test? Was it a fill in the blank test? Was it a short answer test? Making sure that we know as specific as possible what these tests look like. Were they done over the computer? Were they done, were they paper pencil tests? Because I don't think they actually mentioned that. So again, those little details, and if that's the case, probably what I would do here is kind of break up this paragraph into 2 paragraphs where you talked about, the student would talk about the incentives, and then in the next paragraph, talk about exactly what the tests look like, or vice versa. Either one would have worked. They could have switched those up a little bit. So they kind of talk about 2 separate memories, the AR tests, and also with those AR tests, I would almost encourage this particular student to tell me about a particular AR test that they took. What specific book did they go over? Do they remember what the questions were? Did they get a prize afterwards? Was there a specific prize that they got afterwards? Because this is more general, and with the literacy narrative, you want to concentrate on specific memories. So I would encourage them to maybe explore that. Then they kind of go into the Library Media Center, and this whole section right here is leading up to where they're introduced the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series, which is an awesome, awesome series. So I like how they start with kind of that description of the library. Could they have been a little bit more specific? Potentially, but overall it's not poorly done. But what I really, really wanted to concentrate on was right here where he talks about the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series. So what I would suggest for this portion, because remember with the literacy narrative, you can focus on 2 memories. So Diary of a Wimpy Kid, a lot of kids have good memories of reading these books, this series. So what I would encourage him to do if I was giving him revision suggestions would be to tell me about the first Diary of a Wimpy Kid book he remembered reading. Because he mentions how each book from the series snatched my attention from whatever I was doing. So obviously they immerse, and I like how he describes that their comical essence of the book made me wonder what historical event was going to happen next. I was excited to continue my reading. Those are all really, really good points that he's bringing up about how he felt when he read the books. And so that's really, really good because you do want to be bringing in your emotions to these things. One thing that was lacking earlier when he's talking about the AR test is How did he feel when he was taking those tests? Again, I have a lot of questions. So, did taking the AR test make him frustrated, sad, like, oh, I got to take another one of these? Like, just a little bit more about how he felt while he was taking those tests would have really, really helped to elevate that section a little bit. But for here, he did a really, really good job with that. But let's try to talk about a specific Diary of a Wimpy Kid book that he loved. He can kind of give that overview of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but let's talk about one that he particularly remembers reading and enjoying. And then just really take that one memory and delve deep into it. Because with the literacy narrative, as I said, it's not a literacy autobiography. It's a literacy narrative. So we're going to be concentrating on a very specific memory and not just kind of like a generalized overlook of everything. So I think that right there is what would really make this a better paper. So, but overall, it's not a bad start. This is a really, really good start. And I really actually like his conclusion paragraph. It's a pretty strong conclusion. It talks about how the Diary of a Wimpy Kid led to Percy Jackson, which led to other books and made him look back on memories as a whole with a gratuitous mind for teaching me a lesson I haven't realized until now. That, where he discovered the AR really wasn't that bad, because I know a lot of kids crumble about taking AR or other type of reading tests. But in this case, it actually helped him develop a greater love of literacy. And so it wound up being a good thing. So these are just some brief little tidbits of information of things that, as a grader or as a peer reviewer, as I'm going over a paper that I would suggest for the student to do in order to elevate it. Notice I didn't harp on the grammar too much. Now, the grammar is important, and we're going to get into the grammar. But the first thing I want you to do is, after you do a rough draft, is I want you to be concentrating on the content. Let's get the content down, and then we'll do the little nitty-gritty grammatical points as the paper progresses. But overall, pretty decent job. Nice first start. It really isn't bad. I know students are like, oh my gosh. I have found that students can actually be the harshest critics of another student's work. So I want you to notice that as I was going through this, I pointed out some things that needed improvement, a few grammar things even in there, but then I also tried to point out, hey, they did this really well. And so when you're doing peer reviews or when we're reviewing examples in class, always try to find something good that the paper did, because there's always going to be something good, because that's those little boosts of confidence that you can give your classmates is also going to help elevate their writing. But as I said, we will probably come back to this in class just a little bit to go over it in a little bit more detail. But this is just kind of your introduction on how to elevate narratives and what exactly I'm going to be looking for.